Oh, God! Jesus Christ. Of course, only I could make it a quarter of the way through 2019 before I even got the chance to record my video listing movies from the previous year. I've got a lot going on in my life, you guys. It's probably a good thing this list took as long as it did, since it allowed me the chance to watch a lot of these over again. With that said, I kinda just want to stop stalling for time at this point and jump right into it. If you saw last year's video for the 2017 superhero movies, then we're doing the same shtick this time around. If not, first off, you should go watch that video. And point number 2, this is going to be simple enough. We're looking at all of the theatrically released superhero movies of the previous year, looking at them from my least favorite all the way up to what I consider the best of the bunch at the number 1 spot. Think something similar to the yearly animation rankings done by CellSpecs. And fudging the rules ever so slightly with a pick that you'll see down the line, I managed to get last year's crop up to an even 10. Now most of you, I'm going to assume, are going to disagree with a lot of my placements. If that's the case, I'd gladly like to see what your rankings of last year's superhero movies look like. Also, while I'm going to try and keep this video as accessible as possible for the people who didn't get the chance to see all of these movies last year, do be aware of spoilers for each of these picks. Let your opinions be known in the comments, and without further ado, let's get it on!
I am Venom, and you are mine. The world is not so ugly after all.
I mean, it wasn't nearly as bad as I expected? That said, I'm legitimately baffled as to how this one of all movies made almost $1 billion. Venom feels like a piece of taffy being stretched lazily between the two extremes of gonzo out there weirdness, unlike any other superhero movie, and flaccid, boring, unambitious nothing that's exactly like every superhero movie circa a decade and a half ago. Seriously, everything from aesthetic to pace to structure reeks of a bygone age for the genre, and while I'm sure some will appreciate the throwback, it leads to a film where my feeling is just kinda Dialogue is super trite on top of all that. There is some goofy entertainment value to be had, and Tom Hardy is definitely making a choice with how to play this character, but it's laughably bad. Eddie Brock is more of a collection of tics than he is a character. He's funny enough to watch in scenes, but I never actually grow to care about him. It's definitely a case where the unorthodox central performance is the main thing that makes the movie noteworthy, but not in a positive Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark in the first Iron Man sense. I don't end the movie wanting to see more of this take on Eddie Brock, I just kind of find him a fascinating curiosity for a couple hours. The weird, bizarro self-parody vibe of this movie would be fine if I believed that the whole film knew that's what it was. Outside of Hardy's own acting choices, though, it's just kinda generically bad. Action scenes aren't bad, though, even if it's nearly halfway through the movie before the first one. Venom's own character and relationship with Eddie is flimsy at best. That dynamic tries to be the heart and soul of the film toward the end, but it's just not there. I don't know, I'm curious as to how this one became kind of a phenomenon. I suppose I'm glad people enjoyed it, and that even I didn't find it to be an unsalvageable train wreck, but honestly, that would have been preferable to the minuscule impression it left on me. Let's just say, if this is where the live-action Sony Spider-Verse is going, then I'm somehow even less excited than I was before for Morbius.
Okay, that's it. I'm done. I've had it with all this Nickelback hating, right? You think that makes you cool with the cool kids in school, Fred?
No, it just makes me right.
It doesn't.
They're overproduced, formulaic ear garbage.
Oh, really? You know who might disagree with that? Facts.
I just really didn't care for this one. The jokes didn't land as hard as the first film, and the decision to fridge Vanessa threw me off big time, and I just couldn't get emotionally invested. I don't think it's a bad movie, but it just doesn't compel me. On a second viewing, this time with the extended cut, I'd better appreciate the way the movie almost paints Wade as controlling the film around him, with the exception of Vanessa's death and how he's almost bitterly fighting against the filmmakers for doing that. Don't get me wrong, there is stuff to like in Deadpool 2, and it does make me laugh, but not nearly as much as the first film did. I'm not sure what it is. It may be that this movie doesn't adopt the first film's approach of spacing out big, wacky Deadpool set pieces with lengthy sequences of Wade pre-transformation which are more grounded and emotional, thus meaning that if you don't find Deadpool inherently to be laugh-out-loud funny, then you're just stuck with a kind of obnoxious character for the entire movie. Now, I like the character of Wade Wilson more than a lot of people do, and Deadpool 2 definitely tries for moments of grounded emotion. But the magic formula that made the first film work as well as it did just isn't here for this one, I don't know. None of the jokes make me roll my eyes or anything, although I will admit the comedically juxtaposing an action beat with unfitting licensed music genre of gag wore thin fast. And I know it's not necessarily that this type of humor just isn't for me. I'll say that the relationship between Russell and Wade plays better on a second watch. I actually kind of start to tear up a bit around the climax, which is actually more than I can say for the next pick on the list. Everything from the supporting cast, to the action, to the weirder comic booky plot points are just enough to make me go, neat, and leave me not all that pressed to actually think much more about it once the film is ended. If the first Deadpool was one of the movies that made me a bit apprehensive about the creative team at Fox losing the right to these characters, then the second film is unfortunately something that makes me a little bit happier to see them go. However unsure you are about Disney handling Wade, I don't think they can do much worse than this film, harsh as it sounds.
Ants! Ants! Ant-Man!
Ooh, I'm apprehensive about this one. Might as well copy and paste a lot of that last slot, honestly. Sequel that's not as good as the original, not all the jokes land, in fact I'd say it's about a 50-50 split, but hey, at least the ones that did land got some pretty hard laughs. A lot of people complain about the color grading and the lighting in Marvel movies, and I gotta tell ya, it never stands out as badly to me as it does in this film. It's almost reminiscent of Green Lantern, just how orange everyone is. Compared to Black Panther and Infinity War and others, and the general aesthetic and composition is honestly kinda amateur. All of the interesting shots are the CG-heavy stuff. My biggest problems with this film have actually been summed up quite neatly elsewhere. I recommend Brown Table's video on the subject for specificity. In short, there's just not a lot going on under the surface of this one. I couldn't tell you for the life of me what Scott Lang's arc or personal journey is supposed to be in Ant-Man and the Wasp, if anything, and any uniting themes are vague and the conflict is all kinds of contrived. There's a lot about Ghost I like. Her design is neat, her powers are cool, there's a sort of eerie charm to Hannah John Kamen's performance, and I like that she's another sympathetic villain, but all of those cool trappings are hindered by a character who, at their core, is doing a lot that they don't have to for no narratively justified reason, just so we can have more action scenes. And the final way her issues are resolved are so lazy it hurts. Speaking of the action, with the exception of the one scene that made it into all of the trailers, there's really not that many creative uses of the villain and hero powers in this movie either. We've got a bad guy who can walk through walls and good guys who shrink, and hardly any of the action set pieces emphasize the shrinking or the going through walls. I mean, the chase scene with the shrinking and growing cars is cool, but it feels like Ant-Man, Wasp, and Ghost's power sets are woefully underutilized in this film. Which I'm genuinely kinda shocked by, given that it's the same director as the previous movie, and that one utilized the shrinking abilities really creatively. Unlike either of the Guardians of the Galaxy films, or Thor Ragnarok, or even the first Ant-Man, there's almost nothing of substance stringing together the plot points and set pieces and sketch-like comedy scenes here. There are moments of heart, but much like Deadpool 2, it's missing a strong central foundation that the original film had. Honestly, this and DP2 were such similar experiences for me, you can kinda consider this something of a tie. This is low tier of the MCU movies for me, like bottom 3. Not a terrible film necessarily, but even at its high points, it's only ever approaching anything really solid. Curse this movie for getting me to laugh at a fart joke. I am honestly shocked at myself for having this movie this high on the list. For those who don't know, since I don't bring it up all that often, I have a very love-hate relationship with Teen Titans Go. More emphasis on hate than love. As a fan of the original Teen Titans cartoon and someone who really sees a lot of potential in those characters, even in an overtly comedic context, the uber-popular Cartoon Network series that's been running for the past couple of years has pushed a lot of my buttons in all the wrong ways. At its best, the Teen Titans Go series is harmless with moments of sporadic cleverness, and at its worst, it's genuinely awful anti-intellectual garbage. Thankfully, Teen Titans Go to the movies, though while still not something I would recommend paying money to see in theaters, lands on the better side of the TTG spectrum easily. Which is to say that there's not necessarily anything here that you couldn't get out of one of the better episodes of the show proper, but with that being the case for a theatrically length movie, it ultimately leads to an experience that I don't remotely regret having had. I found myself chuckling despite myself quite a few times. Jokes that really shouldn't do it for me, just going strictly off my own comedic sensibilities, still manage to get me to smile, and if I'm being honest, most of that is probably down to the character designs. I stopped just short of saying I like this art style, but comedic beats punctuated by very simple arch character expressions tend to make me chuckle. It is still Teen Titans Go though, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The song sequences really didn't do it for me, and the jokes, as are standard for this property, can get really inane and non-sequential, and some of these really land while others don't so much. One of the biggest problems I've always had with TTG, which is sadly reflected in this movie and has been gone into by a couple of other critics, is how the main cast is essentially the same character repeated 5 times. Even in the very simplest and silliest of children's properties, and I'm talking like grade school level stuff here, the joy of an ensemble is seeing different personalities interact off each other. With Teen Titans Go, what you're basically watching is the very same simple-minded, dim-witted, obnoxious, selfish, gross child with a propensity for sarcasm and some warm redeeming qualities copy-pasted nearly half a dozen times. That said, I'm normally way more outright bothered by these takes on the Titans, and while Beast Boy's affect still grates on me big time, there's an actual endearing dynamic here that's not present in a lot of the show. The movie has a heart, and the characters aren't super mean-spirited, so that's probably why I'm able to get behind it more than I am the series. A feature-length runtime, even with this obnoxious sense of humor, demands making the characters more sympathetic than they tend to get in 11-minute chunks. If you don't mind the more low-brow stuff, then I definitely recommend at least checking this out once. Especially if you're a hardcore DC fan who will appreciate a lot of the smaller in-jokes. It definitely could have been way worse.
Damn it! What are you doing here? Deco!
Oh, hey there, Cop John! Maybe calm down
Don't you dare tell me what to do! Bakugo, behave yourself!
Why is that boy so angry?
That's just who he is.
I bet you didn't know that I was a freaking weeb, did ya? Haha! And thanks to a limited theatrical run in America, this weeb gets to indulge. The shonen jump in quality from the previous spots on this list to these top 6 is so Herculean as to be almost embarrassing. This is where we transition from stuff that's mostly alright or pretty good to some really freaking great movies. I'm willing to bet a fair few of my audience don't even know what the heck this is, despite Hero Academia being the poster child of shonen anime for the past few years. But don't worry, this movie's got you. It comes equipped with a nice and extensive recap of the premise of the series, if for whatever reason you've decided to watch this film as a standalone. Taking place in an alternate universe where 80% of the world's population is born with superpowers called quirks, My Hero Academia follows one of the few born without, as he manages to get his and everyone else's idol in his corner as a mentor, going on tons of adventures as a student at UA, a school for upcoming heroes. It's a fantastic show, and anyone who's into superheroes but hasn't given it a shot yet absolutely should. Two Heroes takes place a ways into the series, following the protagonist Deku as his mentor All Might takes him to an island of inventors to meet a friend from his past, where Deku and a bunch of his fellow students get roped into an unexpected villain attack which leaves them the only ones available to fight through a highly fortified skyscraper with baddies out to steal a valuable piece of tech. Like the series proper, this movie has a rad soundtrack, vibrant and creative aesthetic, killer fight animation, more than a few big laughs, and makes really creative use of the cast's powers, which are eclectic and varied as their distinct and often extreme personalities. And unlike the show, this movie has everyone fighting in stylish formal wear, which is rad. If you're at all familiar with stories, but especially shonen anime movies with this kind of plot setup, there's a plot twist to this one that I think you'll see coming from a mile away, but the way it plays out and the reasons behind it are way more interesting than said twist usually gets. Either way, it's a way more personal story than it appears to be in the first two-thirds, and there's even more twists that tie the plot back into the main arc of the series proper. Most importantly, although it seems at first like one of those anime movies where the main character of the series merely exists as a tag-along footnote in the story of characters only appearing in the film, Two Heroes is a great showcase for the character of Deku and his own personal narrative. There are certainly things about this movie that might not quite gel for you if you're not already a fan of this series, and by extension haven't already seen it way before I eventually did, but I wouldn't say it's a bad idea to check out this film even if you're not a Hero Academia fan. It's a nice, exciting, and compelling distillation of the best things about the show, and it might even be a good gateway into the series if you're really apprehensive about it for whatever reason, and want a self-contained dose of why it works. It's some glorious action animation and effective character work wrapped up in what's essentially superhero Die Hard. What more could you want? Also, a second movie is coming this year? What? As I alluded to earlier, the one positive of me taking as long as I did with this list is that I can view stuff like Aquaman, which releases at the very tail end of the year, with some genuine distance. Starting with this movie, I could easily see someone having any of these films as their personal favorite of the year and totally understand. With that said, Aquaman isn't a perfect movie, far from it. In fact, I'd say it's only a truly great film on a visual level. The character arc and performances are solid, it's the first DCEU film with villains that really work, and also the first one with consistently impressive and visceral action scenes. And dude, I think I might straight up give this movie all-time best hero and villain costumes. There's officially no more excuse for watering down the heightened nature of comic book costumes on screen when this movie goes all the way with it and they look great. That said, its weaknesses lie in its dialogue, which is really quite awful at times. Only some of the jokes land, and there's way too much repetition and insistence on exposition. The plot is also very standard and straightforward, mainly just a vehicle for the cool set pieces and visuals. There's a real sense of formula, with the movie taking a cyclical things happen, stop for exposition, explosion from stage right, things happen, repeat approach. I don't want to run the risk of overstating, but I genuinely wonder if this is the most I've ever enjoyed a movie despite finding its script this weak. Although I will admit that even as the script has a lot of trite elements to it, I do commend it for avoiding a lot of other tropes I was worried it'd fall into. The songs that aren't part of the orchestral score are also always out of place when they pop up, I'd have much rather we stick with just instrumentation throughout the whole film, especially since Arthur's own theme is straight up radical. It's a testament to how well the rest of the film works and how much it knows what it is, that it still lands for me the way it clearly wants to despite these many issues I have with it. This movie is in a lot of ways the Aquaman movie I thought we would never get, the one that's just straight up goofy, silly, earnest, colorful, adventurous romp with no sense of artifice or shame about being the one where a guy talks to fish. There's none of that glib, self-deprecating, how dumb is this guy vibe that this character carried in Justice League. Just embracing a very Silver Age sense of comics leaping to screen. You have no idea how much I struggled with whether to put this above or below the Hero Academia movie, but of the two, this is one I'd sooner pay money to rewatch, so I suppose that says all you need to know. In less creative or capable hands, this movie's script could have given us another BVS or Suicide Squad or Justice League, but with so much of it firing on all cylinders outside of that, I can't help but recommend it. In short, this is basically what would happen if you made a film out of a really high-tier episode of CW's Arrowverse. And if that's what these movies are gonna be from now on, then I am on board. There, I made the obligatory joke. I feel like a lot of people dismiss this movie as time goes on, but I thought it was a worthy sequel, and personally enjoyed it more than the first movie despite the plot not being nearly as tight, specifically in regards to the Jack stuff. On repeat viewings, especially the stuff with the rest of the family, isn't as strong as Elastigirl's plot, but I do like it as a new perspective and growth for Bob's character. For the most part, I think Evelyn Dever is a really interesting villain with a really smart plot, even if there are issues with her motivation, which, when combined with the relative pointlessness of the Jack stuff, means the movie is at its weakest, meaning just good instead of outright great, in the third act. I feel like elements of this movie are a direct response to the critiques of the first film being exceptionalist, though thankfully not to the point of coming off defensive. It's just odd to see those same readings pop up with this movie when it's far more explicit about how the supers, or at the very least Helen, are in the hero game for moral reasons. The action is hella creative. I know everyone's highlight is Jack versus the raccoon, but every set piece in this movie is exciting and memorable. And hello, can we talk about how gorgeous this movie's use of color and lighting is? It's so eye-catching and dynamic, laying the tapestry of a bigger, broader, brighter world than the first film, as supers come out from under society's constraints. Like the first film, the dialogue and performances are also naturalistic and clever. Way more adult than they tend to get in kids' movies, even by Pixar standards. The score is spectacular, the direction is dynamic. This is all yet another case where I could easily swap this movie with the previous two spaces based on the turning of the tide. Right now it's above Aquaman and Two Heroes because even though those movies have less issue maintaining momentum and finish stronger, Incredibles 2 gives me far more of interest to think about and is a fair bit cleverer.
It is noble that she would volunteer to cook for everyone. And although I have never had potato salad,
Of course.
I sense that this white woman does not season her food.
That's right.
The now year-plus long attempts by parts of the wider film discourse to paint this movie as overrated or somehow having great crippling flaws, especially when it had a genuine shot at being awarded the highest honor in Hollywood, often makes me wonder fleetingly if that's ever going to be me. Like, if I'm ever going to sit down with this one and suddenly I'm going to enjoy myself less, or if I'm going to lose interest during the big action climax like many others seem to. Or if suddenly the VFX won't work for me all around because people love to complain about those, but I'm sorry, I've watched this movie over a dozen times and it's never been anything less than a top-tier film experience for me. The CGI in the final fight sucks. There's a stretch of subpar CG for like 3 minutes total of this whole movie, stop exaggerating. But people only like it cause it's a black movie. Yeah, it's almost like the blackness of the cast is integral to every single one of the movie's themes and broader ideas and even character motivations. Or something. I'm not someone who thinks the climax drags this movie down at all. In terms of plot structure, it had to happen the way it did, and despite some dodgy effects, I always have a ball throughout that part of the movie. Outside of that, I think you could make a genuine argument, like Kevin Feige himself did, that this is the best movie Marvel Studios has ever made. I think you can make similar arguments for a couple other MCU movies, hence why it's not the highest MCU film on this list, but really, I'd make this a three-way tie for number one if I could. I sometimes forget that this is an MCU movie on rewatches in the best way possible. Despite picking up from Captain America Civil War, Panther is about as ultimately self-contained as an MCU movie gets. It is completely and utterly its own film and the singular vision of its writer-director. Every shot, every cut to an actor's performance has a purpose. If this one didn't resonate for you, I honestly gotta tell you, I feel more pity than I do empathy. This movie is, no holds barred, a genuine masterwork, the first of what I consider 3 on this list, and I look forward to watching it a dozen more times.
Why would you do that? We're in the endgame now.
And here we go with another masterwork. I think the fact that a movie that's 19 films into a franchise and a sequel to several other sub-franchises could be enjoyed as a standalone piece at all is a testament to how great this one is. I feel it's almost silly to hold it against the movie that it doesn't 100% function for the uninitiated, since that's true of most sequels, if not all, in any franchise. I have to put it under the number 1 spot if you twist my arm though, because I can think of a couple lines of dialogue that don't play for me in this one. The Russo brothers continue to prove they're the best action directors in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in terms of using and framing all the characters' various abilities dynamically, or at least have the best second unit team, I don't know. And my god, the character interactions are just moment after moment of pure, unbridled Thor and Rocket's killer bromance, the whole team on Titan's uber dysfunctional camaraderie. Tony's trying his best, guys, really he is. Wanda and Vision and the ever fascinating, ever controversial Thanos himself. The whole cast shines, but Brolin, Zaldana, Hemsworth, Pratt, and Downey are the show stealers. Alan Silvestri's score? By like Alan Silvestri, I adore. It's a beautiful instrumentation throughout, highlighting the grand, cinema epic feel, just as some of the equally beautiful visuals do. What can I say, all the big cheer moments and most of the laughs are still just as impactful for me on an 8th, 9th, or 10th viewing as they were on the first. There are some people for who this movie doesn't work on any level, and once again, I just gotta say I feel bad for you guys. It's an achievement in filmmaking in multiple levels and the highlight of the year easy. But not the highlight of the year.
You know I'm older than you. 15 months, but it's pretty significant if you ask me.
Well, Einstein said time was relative, right?
Nice.
Friends?
Friends.
Cool.
See you around, Spider-Man.
This film is straight up art. Like, I consider all movies art, duh, but Into the Spider-Verse is a genuine masterpiece of fiction, with only even the slightest of personal flaws for me. That is to say, I'd much rather the film where Penny Parker, Spider-Ham, and Spider-Noir got to feel a bit more well-realized and leave a bit more of an impression beyond just the novelty of their aesthetic and mere existence. Though honestly, from what I've seen, the solution to that might just be in watching the film's deleted scenes. That aside, what we have here is a movie full of iconic imagery, spectacular use of a comic book aesthetic, a living, breathing setting with tons of work put into making it disparate but also relatable to our reality, perfectly naturalistic and human characterization complemented by naturalistic and human voice acting, fun new takes on all of the pre-existing characters, including an insanely fascinating take on Dr. Octopus, a Peter Parker and Wilson Fisk very different from what audiences are likely accustomed to, and the best version of Miles Morales bar none. We've also just got a really economic script which wastes no time and no opportunities. And the score? Holy hell, every track is great, reflecting the movie's varied tones but also excellent listening on its own. More than any other movie on this list, which is saying a lot, you can feel the pure passion gushing out of this film's every orifice like a totally radical 90s fruit snack. Can we just take a minute to acknowledge how spoiled we are? 2018 was the year we finally got Incredibles 2 and Infinity War, movies that people had been waiting on for a decade or more, a cultural touchstone in Black Panther, a movie that lets us know how much fun DC is willing to have with their properties in Aquaman. All of them are by many, if not most, accepted as worth the wait and then some, and then out of the blue, expected by no one, it's all surpassed by this movie. This might legit be one of the best films of the decade, and I feel privileged, genuinely privileged, to have gotten to see it and most of the rest of this list. I don't know if I can say that this year was better on average than 2017 for the genre, but looking at what we got here, I'll confidently say that some of my all-time favorites have some new and very welcome company. So, what do you think? Do you agree with me, or am I a crazy person with no taste? Or both? Would you like to see me do more videos with a list-like structure in the future? If so, on what? Let me know in the comments, and like the video if you liked, and subscribe for more stuff in the future. I don't think any of you guys really know just how validating it is to me every time I see a new subscriber, or a bunch of likes on one of my videos, or healthy discussion happening in my comments section. It's really the big thing that spurs me on to keep making this stuff, and I don't know, it just makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside to know that I'm appreciated, so please don't feel shy about letting me know what you think of my stuff, even if it's constructive criticism. With that said, it hopefully won't be a million years before my next video, and I will see you all then.